It begins in the quiet, in a place where time itself seems to have settled like fine dust on every surface. Here, under the low, focused light of a conservation lamp, rests a fragment of baked clay. It is not beautiful. It bears no gold, no lapis lazuli. Its value is not in its artistry, but in its stark, unadorned function. This object, no larger than a human hand, is a vessel for memory, a piece of the world's first attempt to write itself down. And as we draw near, moving through the suspended silence of the archive, a question begins to form. It is not a loud or demanding question, but a persistent whisper that emanates from the object itself. It concerns the very first story we believe we know, the story of our own beginning. The marks pressed into this clay 5,000 years ago do not speak of divine love or a grand cosmic design. They speak of something else entirely, something far more pragmatic and unsettling. They read less like a sacred text and more like a memorandum, the minutes of a meeting that decided our fate before we had a name. The gloved hand of a researcher turns the tablet with an almost reverential slowness, angling it to catch the light. Each movement is deliberate, a conversation across an impossible gulf of time. Outside these climate-controlled walls, the world rushes on, but in here, the only measure of progress is the careful deciphering of a single eroded symbol. This is the patient work of listening to the dead, of trying to reconstruct a forgotten sound from its faint echo. The air is still, heavy with the scent of old paper and the dry, earthen smell of the clay itself. We are in a space between worlds, a bridge built of academic rigor and quiet contemplation. The researcher's eyes, magnified by a lens, trace the lines of the inscription, not as a believer seeking revelation, but as a reader searching for clarity, for the simple, administrative truth of what the scribe intended to record on a long-forgotten afternoon in ancient Sumer. This patient, human act of looking is the first step toward understanding the profound strangeness held within this mundane object. Look closer at the marks themselves. They are not the flowing curves of an artist's hand, but the sharp, angular impressions of a stylus pressed into wet clay. This is cuneiform, a system born not of poetry, but of accounting. Its purpose was to count sacks of barley, to record land sales, to codify laws. It was the technology of bureaucracy, the language of logistics. The mind that created this was methodical, pragmatic, concerned with order and categorization, and it is this mind, the mind of the scribe, that we must attempt to understand. He was not a mystic channeling divine whispers. He was an administrator, a civil servant in a complex and highly organized society. When he turned his attention to the subject of creation, he did not abandon his methodology. He applied the same dispassionate, record-keeping lens to the gods and to humanity that he applied to temple inventories. He was not telling a myth as we understand it. He was filing a report, documenting a sequence of events with the detached precision of his profession. This single tablet is not an anomaly. It is one of hundreds of thousands unearthed from the tells of what is now southern Iraq, the sun-baked plains between the Tigris and Euphrates. An entire civilization's memory, fired into permanence. Imagine the sheer scale of this recovered archive, a library of clay detailing every facet of Sumerian life, from legal disputes over irrigation canals to lists of kings who reigned for millennia. This was a culture obsessed with documentation, with the act of making a permanent record. They believed that to write something down was to give it a fixed and lasting reality. This obsession suggests a worldview grounded in structure, in hierarchy, in the belief that the cosmos itself operated according to principles that could be observed, recorded, and filed away. We are not looking at a collection of fanciful stories. We are examining the administrative records of a civilization that saw the universe as a vast, functioning, and meticulously managed state. Let us return to this specific fragment, a piece of a larger text catalogued as the Epic of Atrahasis. The scribe's account is unnervingly direct. It begins not with a void or a divine thought, but with a problem. A practical, terrestrial problem. The record states that before the creation of humankind, the labor of maintaining the world, of digging the great rivers and canals that made the land fertile, was borne by a class of junior gods, the Igigi. For centuries, they performed this work. But the toil, the Dulu, became too great. The text records their complaint with administrative finality. The work was heavy. The distress was much. They lay down their tools. They burn their spades. They surround the dwelling of their chief administrator, Enlil. This is not a moment of cosmic wonder. As recorded by the scribe, it is the world's first labor strike, a dispute that threatens the entire established order. A pause is required here. The silence in the room deepens, and the weight of that simple, bureaucratic phrase, "the work was heavy," settles in. We have been taught to look for poetry in our creation stories, for metaphor and divine allegory, but the scribe offers none. He presents a logistical crisis. The gears of the cosmos were grinding to a halt because the workforce was in revolt. The implications of this perspective are vast and deeply unsettling. It reframes the celestial as the managerial. It suggests that the forces governing reality were not concerned with morality or salvation, but with productivity and the maintenance of a system. The wind might be howling faintly against the thick windows of the archive, a sound from the outside world that only emphasizes the deep, suspended quiet of this inner chamber, where a 5,000-year-old problem of management is being reread. The key to this entire account, the word that appears again and again with methodical repetition, is Dulu. It is an Akkadian term, inherited from the Sumerian, and its meaning is unambiguous. It translates to work, toil, burden, corvée labor. It is not the noble effort of a co-creator, but the heavy, thankless task assigned to a subordinate. The texts are explicit. The gods were suffering under the Dalu. And so, in the cosmic council that follows the strike, their solution is not to create a companion or a creature to be loved. The solution is to engineer a replacement. A being must be fashioned who can take on the Dolu, who can bear the load of the gods. The scribe records this decision with the same factual tone he might use to document a change in agricultural policy. The need was identified, the specifications were debated, and a new asset was commissioned to solve a labor shortage. This single, recurring term forces us to confront a profound conceptual shift. If the explicit, documented reason for our existence was to alleviate the burden of a pre-existing ruling class, then our place in the cosmic order is not that of a child, but of an employee, or more accurately, a tool. The entire narrative of our origins, as recorded by the world's first writers, is rooted in the language of utility. We were made to be useful. This idea sits uncomfortably within our modern search for meaning and purpose. It suggests that purpose is not something we discover for ourselves, but something that was assigned to us at the moment of our creation. The narrator does not need to elaborate further. The starkness of the scribe's record does the work. The wedge-shaped marks on the clay tablet are no longer just ancient writing. They are the clauses of a contract we never knew we had signed. This is not the story of a single tablet or a single poem. It is the foundational assumption of an entire world-view, a thread that runs through the Eridu Genesis, the Atrahasis, and other accounts from the dawn of civilization. From this perspective, the ziggurats reaching for the sky were not just places of worship. They were administrative centers, earthly extensions of a celestial hierarchy. The complex irrigation systems were not just feats of engineering. They were the very projects that necessitated our existence. The whole of society was structured to fulfill a function, to carry a burden. We are looking at a faded blueprint, a technical manual for a reality that has long since been overwritten by other stories, other gods, and other, perhaps more comforting, explanations for our presence here. The scribe's world was one of cold, hard, functional reality, and his records reflect that with chilling consistency. For those who have remained here in the quiet, listening to this faint signal from across the millennia, the initial question has likely begun to change. It is no longer simply about what is written on this piece of clay. A deeper inquiry starts to form, a sense of unease that comes from recognizing a pattern that feels both alien and strangely familiar. The silence of the archive is no longer empty. It is filled with the resonance of this ancient, administrative logic. The story that follows is for those who are willing to stay with that discomfort, to continue looking at the records not for the answers we want, but for the stark, unsettling data they present. This is not a journey to a final truth, but a descent into the memory of our own designated purpose, a memory that has been waiting patiently in the dark for someone to read the fine print. We must now turn from the general principle of Dulu to the specific, documented evidence of the system it served. We begin with a document that is not a story, not a poem, but a ledger of power. It is known as the Sumerian King List. The object itself is unassuming, a prism of baked clay inscribed on four sides with columns of tightly packed cuneiform. Its function, as stated in its own text, was to record the succession of kingship, the official transfer of rule from one city to another. The scribe who composed it was not creating a myth. He was compiling a definitive, state-sanctioned chronicle. He was an archivist of ages, and his work begins in a time so remote, it precedes our very definition of history. The air in this room is still, but the text on this prism speaks of a world in constant measured motion, a world governed by cycles of immense duration. The opening lines are delivered with the dispassionate clarity of an official announcement. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. The first king is named Alulim. The scribe then records the length of his reign. The number is not vague, not a mythological, for a long time, but a precise figure. 28, 800 years. The entry is methodical. The next king, Alalngar, ruled for 36 Zuizran years. The scribe simply states the figures, one after another, as if recording the yield of a harvest or the dimensions of a temple. There is no embellishment, no awe. It is a data point entered into the official record. The sheer scale of the numbers, when presented with such administrative neutrality, creates a profound cognitive dissonance. We are reading what purports to be a historical document, yet it describes a timeline that our own history cannot contain. The list continues, a relentless column of names and numbers. In the city of Bad Tibira, Enmen-Lu-Ana ruled for 200 years. Enmen-Gal-Ana for 800 years. Dumuzid, the shepherd, for 36 Zuozran years. The pattern is rigid, repetitive. Name, city, duration. The scribe's stylus moves with a steady, practiced rhythm. The cumulative total for the first 8 kings, ruling from 5 different cities, is recorded as 200 years. This is not the language of metaphor. It is the language of accounting, of meticulous, almost obsessive, record-keeping. The impossibility of the content is made all the more stark by the mundane, bureaucratic format in which it is presented. The scribe is not trying to convince us of a miracle. He is simply filing the official report for an age that operated on a different scale of time. Let us pause and consider the physical act of this recording. A man, sitting in the Mesopotamian sun, pressing a reed stylus into a tablet of wet clay. Each wedge-shaped mark is a deliberate choice, a component of a complex system designed for clarity and permanence. He is working from older sources, compiling them into a master list. His concern is accuracy, the faithful transmission of the record. He is not a poet wrestling with the sublime. He is a civil servant ensuring the continuity of the state's memory. The faint, dry scent of the clay in this modern archive is a ghost of that ancient afternoon. The silence here is a continuation of the focused silence in which he must have worked. A silence dedicated not to prayer, but to the precise and thankless task of documentation. The list then reaches a pivotal, world-altering event, yet the scribe's tone remains unchanged. After the entry for the last pre-Diluvian king, he writes with an unnerving finality, "Then the flood swept over." The cataclysm that has echoed through the mythologies of countless cultures is noted here as a simple line item, a transition point in the ledger. It is not an act of divine wrath or a moral cleansing. It is an event that marks the end of one accounting period and the beginning of another. The dispassion is absolute. The flood is a fact, like a change in dynasty, or the transfer of kingship from one city to another. It is simply the next entry in the long, continuous record of terrestrial administration. After this entry, the chronicle resumes with the same methodical cadence. After the flood had swept over, and the kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. A new dynasty begins. The reigns of these post-Diluvian kings are shorter, but still far beyond the span of a normal human life. The first king of Kish, Jushur, is recorded as having ruled for 200 years. The numbers have changed, the scale has been adjusted, but the scribe's methodology remains identical. He continues to list the names and the precise durations of their rule. This consistency suggests that, to the mind of the recorder, the pre-flood and post-flood eras were part of the same unbroken history. The system of accounting for time had been altered, but the fundamental reality of kingship, and the need to document it, had not. We now move from the macro-historical record of the king list to another category of text, one that deals not with the reigns of sovereigns, but with the technical specifications of our own creation. These are the tablets that detail the Council of the Anunnaki, the senior administrators, as they confront the labor crisis of the Igigi. The language shifts from historical accounting to something that resembles a project proposal or an engineering report. The problem is defined. The junior gods can no longer bear the Dalu. The objective is stated, a substitute must be found. The texts do not speak of a desire for companionship or a need for worship. They speak of a functional requirement, a logistical necessity for the continued operation of the terrestrial enterprise. The proposed solution is described with a strange, clinical precision. The goddess Nintu, also called Mami, a specialist in this field, is tasked with the project. The texts outline the materials required. The clay of the Abzu, the deep earth, is to be mixed with the blood and essence of a sacrificed god, a being named Geshtu-A, who was a god who has intelligence. This is not a miraculous birth from a divine thought. It is a manufacturing process, a deliberate act of bioengineering. The instructions are specific, like a formula to be followed. Nintu is depicted as a chief technician, overseeing a procedure that requires specific components and a precise methodology to achieve the desired outcome. The scribe records this not as a sacred mystery, but as a series of procedural steps. The name given to the final product is itself a technical designation. The new being is called the Lulu Amalu. The term does not translate to child of the gods or image of heaven. It translates with stark functionality to primitive worker or savage man. Its name is its job description. The purpose of this creation is stated explicitly and repeatedly across multiple texts. Let him bear the yoke. Let man carry the toil of the gods. Our species, in its first appearance in the written record, is defined by its utility. We were designed to be a solution to a problem, an asset created to absorb the physical burden of a pre-existing hierarchy. The scribe records this fact with the same neutrality he used for the reigns of kings. It is simply the stated purpose of the project. For a moment, step away from the tablet. Listen to the silence of the room you are in. If there is a clock, watch its second-hand move. Note the exact time. This small, deliberate act of observing and marking a moment in time is a faint echo of the scribe's work. It is an attempt to fix a point in the vast, flowing current of what is. In this moment of quiet, you are performing a ritual of awareness, a brief alignment with the ancient impulse to record, to state, "This is how it was at this specific point." This shared act of observation bridges the gap between the archive and the now, a silent acknowledgement that we are still trying to read the records and understand our place within them. This administrative mindset was not confined to the origins of humanity or the lists of kings. It permeated every aspect of Sumerian civilization. Archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of thousands of tablets that are nothing more than meticulous records of daily life. There are lists of laborers and their daily rations of barley and beer. There are contracts for the sale of land, with precise measurements and the names of witnesses. There are inventories of temple storehouses, counting every sheep, every vessel of oil, every measure of wool. This was a culture that believed in the power of the written ledger. To quantify something was to control it. To record it was to make it real and permanent. Consider the implications of this worldview. When a mind so thoroughly conditioned by logistics and accounting turned to the subject of the cosmos, it did not suddenly adopt a new, poetic mode of thinking. It applied the same principles of order, hierarchy, and function. The universe was seen as a vast, well-regulated state. The gods were its administrators, each with specific duties and responsibilities. The creation of humanity was not a separate, sacred event. It was another administrative decision within this cosmic bureaucracy, a solution designed to improve operational efficiency. The scribe was not inventing a mythology. He was documenting the structure of the universe as he understood it, a system based on labor, production, and management. A low hum from the climate control system is the only sound that breaks the stillness. It is a constant mechanical breath, preserving these fragile records against the decay of our own world's atmosphere. Outside, the wind might be rising, carrying dust and the noise of a distant city, but in here, time is held in suspension. A researcher leans closer to a tablet, her focus absolute. She is not reading a story. She is auditing an ancient account, checking the figures, noting the repetitions, searching for the logic that holds the system together. It is a slow, painstaking process of reverse engineering a worldview from its own administrative files, a task that requires an almost inhuman patience. The records are clear about the tasks assigned to this new workforce. The Lulu Amelu were put to work digging the great canals, the Tigris and the Euphrates. That were the lifeblood of the land. They were tasked with cultivating the fields to provide sustenance for themselves and for the dwellings of the Anunnaki. They were responsible for the maintenance of the earthly estate, the physical infrastructure of the gods. The texts read like a list of duties distributed to a new class of laborers. The instructions are practical, terrestrial, and focused on agriculture and construction. There is no mention of prayer, worship, or ethical behavior. The primary requirement was the fulfillment of the assigned dolu. This was not an indefinite, unstructured servitude. The system described in the records included defined cycles of work and rest. Some texts refer to specific days of the month when the labor was to cease, not for holy observance, but for physical respite, to ensure the continued productivity of the workforce. This suggests a managed system, one concerned with the long-term sustainability of its primary asset. The administrators were not just creators, they were managers, monitoring the output and condition of their laborers. The level of detail in these operational procedures is, once again, far more akin to a corporate manual than a sacred text. This relentless focus on the pragmatic forces a difficult re-evaluation. If the beings who governed the world were primarily concerned with irrigation projects, agricultural yields, and the management of labor, then their relationship with humanity was fundamentally economic. They were not divine parents nurturing a child. They were overseers managing a workforce. The entire cosmic drama, as recorded by the Sumerians, was not a story of love and redemption, but a story of infrastructure and resource management. The scribe, in his cold, factual prose, has left us the minutes of the board meeting, the schematics of the project, and the operational guidelines for the new employees. And yet, within this vast and detailed archive of function, there is a profound and unsettling silence. The records are meticulous in describing what humanity was created to do. They are clear on how it was done and who commissioned the work. But they remain almost entirely silent on the larger question of why. What was the ultimate purpose of this great terrestrial project? If humanity was created to serve the gods, what or who did the gods themselves serve? The scribe records the chain of command, but the ultimate purpose of the enterprise is never stated. His job was to record the operations, not to question the mission statement. The light from the conservation lamp casts long shadows across the room, making the inscribed marks on the clay tablet stand out in sharp relief. Each wedge, each line, is a piece of a puzzle that grows larger and more complex the more we examine it. The king list with its impossible numbers. The creation texts with their clinical engineering language. The administrative records that quantify every aspect of existence. These are not disparate myths. They are the cold, interlocking records of a single, coherent system, a reality so pragmatic and so vast that it challenges the very foundation of the stories we have told ourselves about who we are and why we are here. The record has been presented. The numbers have been read. An inventory of the impossible now lies before us, waiting. The work of connecting begins not with a flash of insight, but with the quiet, methodical labor of comparison. In a long, sterile room far from the dust of the dig site, an archaeologist lays out high-resolution photographs of cuneiform tablets on a large, backlit table. One is from the archives of Nippur, another was unearthed from the ruins of Uruk, a third is a fragment from Sippar. They were written by different scribes, in different generations, in cities that were often rivals. Yet, as the researcher traces the symbols with a gloved finger, a disturbing consistency emerges. The same terms appear, in the same context, to describe the same event. The word dulu, the burden of work. The designation lulu amelu, the primitive worker. It is not an echo. It is a copy, a verbatim recitation of a foundational, universally accepted fact. The air in the room is clinical, the light is even and cold, but the pattern it illuminates is anything but simple. This repetition extends beyond the primary creation accounts. It seeps into hymns, into proverbs, into the very fabric of the Sumerian worldview. A researcher, working late into the night, cross-references a lexical list, a kind of ancient dictionary, and finds the entry for humanity annotated with its primary function, to serve. Another scholar, translating a temple hymn to the god Enki, finds a passage that praises his cleverness in fashioning a substitute to relieve the toil of the lesser gods. The story is not confined to a single epic. It is the ambient, assumed reality of the entire culture. It is the answer to a question no one thought to ask because the answer was everywhere, embedded in the language, the rituals, and the social structure. It was not a myth to be believed, but a fact of existence, as certain as the rising of the sun or the flooding of the rivers. The pattern is not just textual, it is geographical. An excavation team, working under the harsh Iraqi sun, sinks a trench into a new tell. They pass through the layers of history, Ottoman, Islamic, Sasanian, Babylonian. Deeper still, they reach the early dynastic period. They unearth the foundations of a building, perhaps a scribal school or an administrative archive. And there, amidst the debris of collapsed millennia, they find them. More tablets. The lead archaeologist cleans one with a soft brush, the cuneiform slowly emerging from its earthen tomb. The preliminary translation, radioed back to the university, confirms the same narrative, the same labor crisis, the same engineered solution. The discovery is not celebrated with a shout, but with a long, weary silence. The pattern is not just consistent, it is inescapable. This is not a search for a single, pristine source. It is the recognition of a signal that has been amplified through repetition. Imagine a room filled with hundreds of clocks, all built by different clockmakers in different towns, yet all striking the hour in perfect unison. At some point, the observer must conclude they are not witnessing a coincidence, but the result of a shared design, a common blueprint that was distributed and adhered to with unwavering fidelity. The tablets are these clocks, and the story they tell is the hour they strike, again and again, across the cities and centuries of ancient Mesopotamia. The work of the modern researcher is simply to stand in that room and listen to the deafening synchronous chime. To see a pattern of this magnitude is to accept a different sense of time. It requires a willingness to sit with the evidence long after the initial discovery is made, to let the sheer weight of the repetition reconfigure one's understanding. Those who have remained in this quiet space, watching the evidence accumulate, are no longer looking for a single revelatory artifact. They are beginning to read a much larger text, one written not on a single piece of clay, but across the entire archival memory of a civilization. This process is not about finding an answer, but about learning to recognize the scale of the question that has been posed. Now, the investigation must move beyond the borders of Sumer. A different archive, a different climate. We are in the highlands of Anatolia, in the excavated ruins of Hattusa, the capital of the Hittite Empire. Here, the language is not Sumerian or Akkadian, but an Indo-European tongue. The gods have different names, the culture different customs. A German archaeological team in the early 20th century discovered a vast library of tablets here. Among them, they found a text known as the Song of Kumarbi. It is the Hittite succession myth, a story of celestial power struggles. And buried within its narrative is a familiar echo. A group of gods is again burdened with harsh labor, digging and dredging. The complaint is the same. The need for a solution is the same. The details have been altered, filtered through a new language and a different cultural lens. The names are changed. Kumarbi replaces Enlil. The specific nature of the work is slightly different, but the core structure of the problem remains intact. It is the Sumerian labor crisis, retold 1,000 years later and 1,000 kilometers away. The archaeologist places a cast of the Hittite tablet next to a photograph of the Sumerian original. The cuneiform scripts are different, but the underlying logic of the narrative is a mirror. It is like finding the same technical manual for the same piece of machinery, but translated into a different language for a foreign market. The product and its function remain unchanged. This suggests that what was being transmitted was not a simple story, but a functional blueprint, a foundational concept of cosmic order that was so essential it survived the collapse of its original civilization and was adopted by its successors. The pattern is no longer just a repetition, it is a legacy, a piece of administrative software designed by the Sumerians that continued to run on the hardware of subsequent empires. The dispassionate logic of the original scribe had proven to be remarkably resilient, capable of being copied and executed long after its author had turned to dust. The silence in the archive feels different now, charged with the realization of this immense, unexamined continuity. A new form of analysis emerges, one that moves beyond simple translation. A researcher feeds the structural elements of these narratives into a database. Not the names or the poetic flourishes, but the raw sequence of events. A problem is identified, labor shortage. A council is convened. A technical solution is proposed, create a worker. A specific material is designated, clay mixed with a divine element. A prototype is fashioned. The workforce is deployed. When visualized, the data from Sumerian, Akkadian, and Hittite sources forms nearly identical charts. It is the cold, skeletal logic of a project management plan, recurring with the precision of an algorithm across disparate cultures. This structural analysis reveals something profound. The myth is not the story itself, but the cultural dressing that surrounds a consistent underlying formula. The scribes were not just copying a narrative, they were preserving a sequence, a causal chain of events that explained the operational structure of their world. The focus of the archaeologist shifts from what the stories say to how they are built. The investigation has moved from linguistics to a kind of reverse engineering of an ancient ideology, trying to understand the original schematic by studying its multiple, later reproductions. The low hum of the computer server processing the data is the only sound, a modern echo of the scribe's methodical work. Let us pause for a moment. Consider the sheer discipline required to maintain such consistency over centuries. Scribes were not artists driven by inspiration. They were technicians trained in the precise replication of a standardized record. Their education involved years of copying older texts, learning the signs, the grammar, the established formulas. Deviation was not encouraged. Fidelity was the highest virtue. The pattern we are observing is not an accident of history. It is the product of a deliberate, highly structured system of knowledge transmission, designed to preserve a core set of information without corruption. The repetition was the very purpose of the institution of the scribe. Now the pattern becomes stranger, more specific. A researcher catalogs the recurrence of a single, seemingly arbitrary detail, the number 7. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the celestial bull has 7 years of famine in his wake. In the creation accounts, Nintu is said to fashion 7 pairs of humans, 7 males and 7 females. The underworld has 7 gates, each with a guardian. The group of divine sages who bring knowledge to humanity, the Apkallu, are 7 in number. The researcher's screen fills with data points, a constellation of sevens, appearing in legal codes, in sacred architecture, in epic poetry, and in administrative lists. The scribes never explained the significance of this number. They simply record it as a given fact of the cosmic architecture. 7 gates, 7 sages, 7 pairs. It is presented with the same administrative finality as the reign of a king or the inventory of a temple. The number is a structural constant, a repeating variable in the equation of reality, whose original meaning is lost to us, but whose persistent presence points to a deeper, underlying order. It is a ghost in the machine, a piece of the original design specification that has been faithfully copied into every iteration of the program, even after its function was forgotten. The focus shifts to the physical world. An archaeologist stands in the excavated ruins of a ziggurat at dusk. The wind moves silently through the broken corridors. He is looking at the building's plan, the careful, mathematical precision of its construction. The structure is not just a building. It is a diagram of the cosmos as the Sumerians understood it. Its tiered levels, often 7 of them, represented the layers between the earth and the heavens. The architecture itself was a form of documentation, a way of inscribing the cosmic order onto the physical landscape. The pattern was not just something they wrote about. It was something they lived inside. This realization connects the abstract world of the texts to the tangible world of the ruins. The scribe recording the 7 gates of the underworld and the architect designing the 7 levels of the ziggurat were working from the same set of instructions. They were both documenting the same reality, one in clay and the other in brick. The researcher in the archive and the archaeologist in the field are looking at 2 copies of the same blueprint, one textual and one physical. The convergence of the evidence from 2 entirely different fields of study makes the pattern too solid, too substantial to be dismissed as mere coincidence. And then, a final, more subtle pattern emerges, one defined not by what is present, but by what is consistently absent. Across this vast library of administrative records, epic poems, and architectural plans, there is a profound silence. The texts describe the actions of the Anunnaki in meticulous detail. They debate, they plan, they issue decrees, they engineer solutions, but the records are almost entirely devoid of any description of their inner lives, their personal motivations, their emotional states. They are presented as a collective of pure function, their existence defined entirely by their administrative duties within the cosmic state. The archaeologist makes a note in his logbook, a simple observation written under the dim light of his tent. The records detail what the gods did, but never who they were. This absence is not random. It is systematic. The scribes, so obsessed with documenting every other detail of their world, consistently omitted this one. It is as if the personal psychology of the ruling class was considered irrelevant to the official record. Or perhaps it was a subject that was simply not available for documentation. This shared silence, this pattern of omission, becomes the most unsettling mystery of all. The investigation has come full circle. It began with the words on a tablet, moved to the patterns connecting hundreds of tablets, and now arrives at the silence that surrounds them. The evidence does not provide an answer. Instead, it reveals a structure, a framework of logic so rigid and so pervasive that it governed an entire civilization's understanding of reality. The dust of millennia has settled on these records, but it has not obscured the pattern. It has only made its rediscovery a slower, more deliberate process. The light on the researcher's table finally clicks off, leaving the tablets and the photographs to rest in the darkness. The silence of the room now heavy with the weight of a consistent and unexplained order. The pattern now requires us to look past the workforce and toward the management. The records do not call them gods in the way we understand the term. They are given a specific, collective designation, the Anunnaki. The word itself is a title, a marker of status within a defined structure. The texts introduce them not through acts of creation or displays of cosmic power, but in council, seated in assembly. Their first appearance in the narrative of our origins is in a meeting, a deliberation convened to address a logistical crisis. The scribe presents them as a governing body, a board of directors tasked with the administration of a vast and complex enterprise. Their authority is not based on love or morality, but on rank. They are the executives, the decision-makers, the beings who hold the power to sign off on projects that alter the state of the world. The setting is not a heavenly court, but a boardroom. Within this council, individuals are distinguished not by personality, but by their specific role and title. The record names Enlil as the chief administrator, the chairman of the assembly. When the Igigi, the junior workforce, go on strike, it is his residence they surround. The complaint is brought to his desk. His response, as documented by the scribe, is not one of divine wrath, but of managerial frustration. He is concerned with the disruption of work, the threat to the established order, the failure of the system. His power is executive. He presides over the meeting. He hears the arguments. He demands a solution. The scribe does not portray him as a father figure or a supreme deity, but as the official in charge of the terrestrial division, a being whose primary concern is the continued, efficient operation of the project he oversees. His function is command and control. Another figure is named, assigned a different, highly specialized function. This is Enki, or Ea, in the Akkadian accounts. His role is not command, but technical expertise. He is the chief scientist, the master craftsman, the head of research and development. When the council is faced with the problem of the striking Igigi and the halt in production, it is Enki who is tasked with designing the solution. He is the one who proposes the engineering of a new being. He is the one who understands the materials required, the clay, the essence, the binding agent. The texts describe his work with the precision of a technical manual. He is not a magician performing a miracle. He is an engineer following a blueprint, a biologist executing a complex procedure. His wisdom is not mystical. It is applied science. His function is innovation and implementation. A moment of stillness is necessary to absorb the implications of this structure. The texts do not describe a pantheon of gods with overlapping powers and volatile emotions. They describe an organization. There is a clear hierarchy, a division of labor, a chain of command. Enlil gives the order. Enki executes the technical plan. Nintu, the specialist, oversees the manufacturing process. Other members of the Anunnaki Council are present to witness and ratify the decision. This is not the chaotic family drama of later mythologies. It is a corporate structure, a well-defined bureaucracy designed for maximum operational efficiency. The beings who govern the world, as described by the first scribes, are not gods. They are administrators. The wind outside the archive seems to carry a low, humming sound, like the sound of a distant, unseen machine that has been running for an eternity. Before the creation of humanity, the records are clear about who performed the Dulu. This task fell to the Igigi. The texts refer to them as the junior gods, but their function is unambiguous. They are the workforce. They are the ones in the trenches, digging the canals, dredging the rivers, piling up the mountains of silt. The Atrahasis epic specifies their number at 600. They are a defined labor division, tasked with the physical maintenance and development of the terrestrial estate. For thousands of years, according to the record, they performed this toil. The scribe does not glorify their work. He simply states it as their assigned function within the hierarchy. They are the lower tier of management, the hands-on operators responsible for all infrastructure projects before a more efficient solution was engineered. Their role in the narrative is pivotal, yet entirely functional. The Igigi are defined by their breaking point. The record states that after 600 years of continuous labor, they could no longer bear the strain. The work was heavy. The distress was much. Their response is not a prayer or a plea. It is direct action. They burn their tools, their spades and baskets, and march on the central administrative complex of their superior, Enlil. As documented, this is not a cosmic war between good and evil. It is an industrial dispute, a labor revolt born of exhaustion and untenable working conditions. Their importance to the story is not in their divinity, but in their function as the catalyst for change. Their refusal to work created the problem that humanity was designed to solve. They are the preceding model, the less efficient machine that broke down and necessitated a replacement. The replacement, the Lolu Amelu, was therefore designed to fit into a pre-existing slot in this cosmic organization chart. The new worker was not created to populate a paradise or to have a personal relationship with its creator. It was created to take over the specific, arduous tasks previously assigned to the Igigi. The texts are explicit. Let him bear the yoke. Let him carry the toil of the gods. Humanity's function was to absorb the Dulu, to ensure that the canals were dug and the fields were tilled, allowing the larger administrative system to continue functioning without interruption. We were, according to this record, a patch for a systemic failure, a biological tool engineered to fulfill a specific operational requirement. The dispassionate tone of the scribe makes this transaction all the more chilling. It was not a birth, it was a deployment. This functional relationship defines the entire early interaction between the Anunnaki and humanity. The records do not speak of love or grace. They speak of production quotas, of resource allocation, of managing the new asset. The ziggurats are described as their command centers, their dwellings on earth. The temples were not just places of worship. They were centers of economic activity, storehouses for the grain and livestock produced by the human workforce. The relationship was that of an overseer to a laborer, a master to a servant. The entire structure of Sumerian society, with its rigid hierarchies and its focus on agricultural surplus, appears to be a direct reflection of this foundational, functional purpose. It was a system designed to generate resources and channel them upward through the chain of command. But there was another category of being, another function that needed to be fulfilled. Once the workforce was in place, it required instruction. It needed to be taught how to perform its tasks efficiently, how to organize itself into a productive society. The records speak of a group of 7 beings, the Apkallu, who were sent to the early human cities for this exact purpose. Their function was purely pedagogical. They were the instructors, the technical advisors. They are described as emerging from the waters of the Abzu, bringing with them the foundational knowledge of civilization, writing, law, architecture, agriculture, mathematics. They did not bring salvation or enlightenment in a spiritual sense. They brought a practical, operational toolkit for building and managing a complex society. The Apkallu are never depicted as rulers or objects of worship. They are temporary consultants, specialists deployed to transfer a specific set of skills and knowledge to the new human population. Their work was to uplift the Lulu Amelu from a savage state to a condition of organized productivity. They taught humanity how to build cities, how to survey fields, how to read the stars for planting seasons, and how to keep records. They were, in essence, the ones who installed the operating system of civilization. Once their function was complete, they receded from the record. Their presence was a targeted intervention, a necessary step to ensure that the new workforce could be properly integrated into the existing economic and administrative structure. The knowledge they imparted was not a gift of love, but a tool for improved performance. Let us return to the Sumerian king list, to that silent administrative accounting of time. The figures who rule before the flood, the 8 kings who reign for a cumulative 200 years, must now be seen in this functional context. They are not human kings in any sense we would recognize. Their role, as recorded by the scribe, is that of governance, of overseeing the terrestrial project during its earliest phase. They are the local regents, the appointed governors who hold the kingship that descended from heaven. This phrase, repeated like a legal formula, implies that their authority is not inherent but delegated from a higher source. They are the managers of the early city-states, the earthly representatives of the Anunnaki administration, tasked with maintaining order and productivity. The impossible duration of their reigns becomes less a question of mythology and more a statement of category. Whatever these beings were, they were not operating on a human biological clock. The scribe's meticulous recording of their precise, multi-millennial terms in office suggests he was not dealing in metaphor. He was documenting a different order of being, a class of ruler whose lifespan was commensurate with the geological timescale of their work. They were to early Earth what a project manager with a tenure of decades is to a modern construction project. Their function was long-term oversight, a stable and continuous management that spanned ages, ensuring the foundational work of civilization was established before a new, shorter-lived model of human kingship was introduced after the flood. The very concept of kingship, in these earliest records, is presented as a functional institution, not an inherent right. It is an office, a technology of social organization that is lowered from heaven and can be transferred from city to city. Eridu holds the kingship, then Bad Tibira, then Larak. The list reads like a record of where the regional headquarters was located at any given time. The individuals who hold the office, Alulim, or Enmenlu Ana, are secondary to the institution itself. They are the office holders, the current occupants of a role that exists independently of them. Their function is to maintain the connection between the earthly domain and the higher authority, to implement the decrees from the council, and to ensure the smooth operation of their assigned sector. The silence of the archive deepens. The air is still. The researcher stares at the text, at the columns of names and numbers that make no human sense. And yet, within the logic of a managed long-term project, they begin to acquire a cold, disquieting coherence. These pre-Diluvian rulers were not ancestors. They were predecessors of a different kind. They were the first phase of management, a category of being whose function was to govern, on a scale that transcended human life entirely. The dust motes that drift in the beam of the lamp seem like tiny, silent witnesses to an order of time so vast that our own history is but a fleeting moment within it. The record simply presents them as facts, leaving us to grapple with the implications of an administration that measured its terms of service in multiples of 600 years. Across all these records, a profound and consistent pattern of omission becomes visible. The scribes, so meticulous in recording the functions, titles, decrees, and actions of these beings, remain almost entirely silent about their nature. We are told what Enlil did, but not what he was. We are given the specifications of Enki's work, but not the substance of his being. The Apkallu bring knowledge, but their own origins are confined to a single, stark image of them emerging from the water. They are defined entirely by their roles, their actions, their utility within the system. There are no descriptions of their inner lives, their personal struggles, their philosophical beliefs. They are presented as figures of pure function, their existence seemingly inseparable from their job descriptions. This absence is not an oversight. It is a defining characteristic of the entire corpus of records. It suggests a relationship between the scribe and his subject that is not one of believer to deity, but of clerk to superior. One does not record the emotional state of the regional manager when filing a report on production numbers. One records the manager's directives, the new quotas, the change in policy. The personal nature of the ruling class is irrelevant to the administrative function of the record. The Anunnaki, the Apkallu, the pre-Diluvian kings, they remain faceless, emotionless ciphers, known to us only through the effects they had on the system they managed. They are a hierarchy of ghosts, visible only by the deep and permanent grooves their actions carved into the structure of our world. The evidence we have examined is a structure, built of clay and time, of meticulous records and repeating patterns. But a structure is defined as much by its empty spaces as by its solid walls. We have been reading the text. Now we must learn to listen to the silence that surrounds it, the profound and unnerving quiet that lies between the lines of cuneiform and between the very layers of the earth. For it is in these gaps, these deliberate and unnerving absences, that a different kind of record can be found. An archaeologist working in the tells of southern Iraq knows this silence intimately. It is a language spoken by the soil itself. As the trench deepens, it cuts through a visible stratigraphy, a library whose pages are layers of compressed time. Here is the floor of a Sasanian house, here a layer of Parthian pottery, here the distinctive brickwork of a Neo-Babylonian temple. Each stratum is a sentence, a chapter in the long story of a single place. But sometimes the story breaks. The archaeologist's trowel, scraping away the dust of centuries, reveals a line that should not be there. A thick, sterile band of dark ash or wind-blown sand, devoid of the usual markers of civilization. No pottery shards, no animal bones, no discarded tools. It is a layer of pure absence, a page ripped from the book of the earth. Below it lies the evidence of a thriving city. Above it, centuries later, a new settlement begins, its foundations laid upon a bed of forgotten silence. This sterile layer is not just an interruption. It is a statement. It is the physical trace of a time when the recording stopped, when the machinery of civilization ground to a halt so completely that it left no ghost, no echo in the soil. It is the footprint of an invisible antagonist, the quiet evidence of a great and total erasure. This same pattern of breakage is found not just in the earth, but in the clay archives themselves. A researcher places two fragments of a tablet side by side on a velvet cloth. They do not quite meet. A section of the text, perhaps a few lines or an entire column, is missing, lost to the fractures of millennia. The scribe's account continues on the second piece, but the context has been severed. A king issues a decree, but the reasons for it are lost in the gap. A list of goods is inventoried, but the recipient is unknown. These physical lacunae are the textual equivalent of that sterile layer in the soil. They are wounds in the memory of the world, moments of information that have been violently and permanently removed, leaving us with a narrative that is coherent in its parts, but broken as a whole, a story forever speaking across a chasm of its own missing pieces. Look closer at a modern translation of any of these ancient texts. You will find its punctuation. Not the periods and commas of the original scribes, but the brackets and ellipses of the modern scholar. A word in brackets signifies a best guess, a reconstruction of a symbol that is half eroded. An ellipsis, 3 silent dots, signifies a void. It is the translator's honest admission of defeat, a mark of respect for what is no longer there. And the Anunnaki, who were in the heavens, decreed the fate. The sentence is a bridge with its middle section collapsed into a dark river of unknowable time. These ellipses are not merely academic notations, they are monuments to the antagonist. They are the quiet, persistent markers of every battle that time has won, every piece of the record that has been successfully and irrevocably silenced. The more we read, the more we realize we are navigating an archipelago of surviving data in a vast ocean of loss. The silence in this room is no longer passive. It feels like an active presence, a force that has been shaping this story from the very beginning. The dust motes drifting in the low light seem to be all that remains of disintegrated tablets, the fine powder of forgotten words. We are not just recovering a history, we are confronting its systematic dismantling. The antagonist is not a being or an event, but a process. It is the slow, relentless entropy of memory itself, a force that grinds down clay, erodes symbols, and buries entire worlds under a blanket of sterile, silent earth. The work of the researcher is a constant struggle against this pervasive, invisible force, an attempt to reconstruct a single, coherent echo from a room full of shattered instruments. The quiet focus required for this work is a form of resistance, a refusal to let the silence have the final word. Let us return to the Sumerian king list, to the most profound break in the entire record. The scribe lists the 8 kings, their cities, and their impossibly long reigns, a continuous chain of 200 years of recorded governance. Then, with no change in his dispassionate administrative tone, he makes a single entry that severs history in two. Then, the flood swept over. This is not an embellishment. It is a line in a ledger. It is the ultimate sterile layer, a hydrological event that serves as a definitive dividing line between one era of accounting and the next. The scribe does not mourn what was lost. He does not describe the cataclysm. He simply notes the event that closed the books on the previous world, the great interruption that necessitated a complete reset of the terrestrial project. The silence that surrounds this entry is deafening. After the entry for the flood, the record resumes with the same methodical calm. After the flood had swept over, and the kingship had descended from heaven. The kingship was in Kish. But everything has changed. The scale is different. The first king of the new era, Jushur, rules for 200 years. The numbers, while still vast by our standards, are an order of magnitude smaller than those that came before. It is not just a new dynasty. It is a new operating system, a different calibration of time and being. The scribe offers no explanation for this change. The record does not connect the world before with the world after. It simply presents them as two distinct data sets, separated by a single catastrophic event that wiped the slate clean. The pre-Diluvian world, with its long-lived administrators, is now a sealed archive, a memory accessible only as a list, its operational details drowned beneath a layer of impenetrable silence. There is another, more subtle silence in the record, one defined by a departure that is never documented. The texts speak of the 7 Apkallu, the sages who brought the arts of civilization to the first cities. They are described with functional clarity. They taught humanity writing, law, and architecture. They fulfilled their role as instructors, as installers of the societal operating system. And then, they are gone. There is no account of their departure, no record of their mission being formally concluded. They simply cease to be mentioned. Their presence in the narrative is a targeted intervention, a temporary deployment. Their disappearance from the record is an unannounced withdrawal, leaving a void where a final report should be. Why was the completion of such a fundamental task not recorded by a civilization obsessed with records? It is a silence that suggests the end of one project phase and the beginning of another, a transition that, for some reason, was not meant to be part of the public file. A pause is warranted here. The weight of these accumulated absences, the missing layers, the broken tablets, the great flood, the silent departure, begins to form a pattern. It is a pattern of deliberate discontinuity, of a history that seems to have been edited, redacted. The story we are able to read feels like the surviving portion of a much larger, more complex account, one whose most critical sections have been either lost to time or intentionally removed. We are left with the operational minutes, but the overarching strategic documents are missing. The silence is not just a lack of noise, it is a lack of data, a structured and recurring void that seems to point toward a truth that was never meant to be preserved. For those who have remained in this quiet observation, the nature of our investigation has now shifted. We are no longer just examining the evidence that exists. We are mapping the shadows cast by the evidence that is gone. This is a more difficult, more contemplative work. It requires a different kind of attention. As a small ritual to acknowledge this shift, find a clock or a watch. Note the precise time. Then, in the comments below, do not write a word of your own thoughts. Simply type the time you observed, followed by the single word. Interval. So, this is not for me or for an algorithm. It is for you. A quiet, personal act of marking a moment of silence, a conscious recognition of the gap between what is known and what has been lost. It is a small participation in the vigil this history demands. The most profound silence of all concerns the administrators themselves, the Anunnaki. The scribes, in their meticulous, bureaucratic fashion, recorded their titles, their decrees, their assemblies, and the outcomes of their projects. We know what they did, but the records are almost entirely silent on who or what they were. Where did they come from? What was their ultimate purpose? If humanity was created to serve them, who or what did they serve? The entire vast corpus of cuneiform, for all its detail on the operations of the terrestrial estate, contains no mission statement for the parent company. It is an organizational chart with the top box left empty, a detailed report on the how that never once addresses the fundamental why. This is not a simple omission. It is a foundational, structural silence that sits at the very heart of the entire recorded system. Imagine finding the complete archives of a vast and complex corporation. You have every memo, every project file, every employee record, every production report for a century. You can reconstruct its entire operational history. But nowhere in those millions of documents is there a single page that states what the company actually does or what its ultimate goals are. You know everything about how it functions, but nothing about its purpose. This is the situation the researcher faces when studying the Sumerian records. The Anunnaki are presented as a fact of existence, a governing body whose own origins and motivations are placed entirely outside the scope of the documentation. Their presence is assumed, their authority absolute, their purpose unstated and, it seems, unrecorded. This silence was nearly made permanent. In the 7th century BCE, the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, aware that the world of cuneiform was fading, attempted to create a master archive, a library at Nineveh, that would hold all the knowledge of his civilization. He sent scribes across Mesopotamia to collect and copy every text they could find: epics, histories, omen lists, administrative records. It was a monumental effort to resist the entropy of time, to create a permanent backup of his entire world's memory. For a brief period, the knowledge was gathered in one place. Then, in 612 BCE, Nineveh was sacked and burned. The great library was destroyed. The clay tablets, however, did not burn. They were fired, baked into a greater permanence, but they were also shattered and scattered amongst the rubble of the fallen city. The thousands of fragments that were later excavated from the ruins of Ashurbanipal's library are the primary source for many of these texts we have been examining. They are a testament to both one man's attempt to preserve everything and the invisible antagonist's ultimate victory. Every tablet we read from that collection is a survivor, a refugee from a cataclysm of fire and forgetting. We read them with the knowledge that for every piece we hold, hundreds or thousands more were lost, ground to dust in the collapse of a burning palace. The silence that emanates from these objects is therefore twofold. It is the silence of the original scribe's omissions, compounded by the silence of catastrophic, historical destruction. We are reading the scorched and broken remains of a world's desperate attempt to remember itself. The final layer of silence is the most subtle. It is the silence of reinterpretation. Over centuries, as the Akkadian and Babylonian empires rose and fell, the original Sumerian accounts were copied, translated, and adapted. The story of the Lulu Amalu, the primitive worker, was slowly transformed. The pragmatic, administrative account of our creation was gradually draped in the garments of mythology and religion. The functional logic was softened, the uncomfortable details were allegorized, and the original purpose was obscured. The creation of humanity ceased to be a solution to a labor problem and became the crowning act of a divine drama. This process was not a malicious act of deception, but a slow cultural drift, a way of making an alien and unsettling story more palatable, more human. But its effect was a form of erasure, a silencing of the original stark signal by burying it under layers of more comforting noise. The scribe himself is a figure of profound silence. He records the deeds of gods and kings, the passage of millennia, the creation of his own species. Yet he never inserts himself into the narrative. He offers no opinion, no emotional reaction, no philosophical reflection. His absence from his own work is total. Was this the result of professional discipline, a trained objectivity that we would now associate with a court stenographer? Or was it a silence born of something else, a lack of curiosity, or a fear of asking questions that were beyond his designated function? We can never know. He remains a ghost, a disembodied hand moving a stylus across wet clay, his mind a black box that faithfully transmitted a reality it never questioned, leaving behind a perfect record of a world whose deepest truths may have been hidden in the very questions he was never permitted to ask. We are left, then, in a space defined by these concentric circles of silence: the silence of the broken earth, the silence of the shattered tablet, the silence of the great flood that divides time, the silence of the unstated purpose, the silence of historical destruction, and the final quiet silence of a story that has been slowly, imperceptibly rewritten over the course of human history. These are not empty voids. They are the contours of the antagonist, the negative space that gives shape and definition to the mystery. The story is not just what was written down on the clay. The true story may be in the spaces between, in the careful, resonant quiet of what was left unsaid, what was violently erased, and what has been irretrievably forgotten. The archive room is dark now, the lamp is off, and the silence feels less like an absence of sound, and more like the final and most enduring artifact. All the fragments now lie on the table, illuminated by the cold, even light of the archive. The king list, with its impossible chronology, the Atrahasis with its cosmic labor dispute, the lexical lists that define humanity by its function, the architectural plans of the ziggurats, mirroring a celestial order. Seen in isolation, they are anomalies, historical curiosities to be explained away as metaphor or primitive fantasy. But seen together, laid out in this suspended quiet, they cease to be separate stories. A different image emerges. It is the image of a single, vast, and internally consistent system, a coherent operational logic that connects the reign of a king for 800 years to the precise mixture of clay and divine essence used to fashion a worker. The dispassionate administrative tone of the scribe is the unifying principle, the steady, humming current that runs through every component of this strange and intricate machine. The profound strangeness is not in any single detail, but in the chilling coherence of the whole. If one accepts for a moment the scribe's premise that these are not myths, but records, then everything locks into place. The long-lived pre-Diluvian rulers are no longer a fantasy, but a different class of being appropriate for a different timescale of work. The creation of the Lulu Amelu is not a miracle, but a necessary and logical solution to a documented engineering problem. The obsessive accounting of goods and labor is not a cultural quirk, but the standard operating procedure for managing a large-scale enterprise. The system, as described, works. It has a terrifying, self-contained logic. The discomfort arises not from its impossibility, but from the realization that if such a system were real, these are precisely the kinds of dispassionate, functional records it would produce. A long silence settles in the room deeper than before. It is the silence of a completed assembly. All the parts are connected, and the machine they form is now visible, sitting there in the dark. It is a machine designed to organize a world, to extract its resources, and to manage its workforce. The researcher leans back, the faint creak of his chair the only sound. He is no longer looking at individual pieces of evidence. He is contemplating the blueprint of a reality that functions without any need for the concepts we hold dear: morality, love, free will, or inherent purpose. It is a reality built on a single unwavering principle: utility. The low, ambient hum of the building feels for a moment like the sound of that ancient machine, still running in the deep background of the world. And here, at the heart of this coherent system, we confront the greatest silence of all. The records provide a detailed origin story for the workforce, humanity. They meticulously document the hierarchy of the administrators, the Anunnaki. But they offer no origin story for the administration itself. Where did this system come from? Who authored the original project charter? The scribes, so thorough in all other matters, present the Anunnaki and their grand terrestrial project as a given, a pre-existing condition of reality. It is as if our entire recorded history begins in the middle of a story whose first chapter, the one that would explain the ultimate purpose of the enterprise, was never made available for the public record. The entire apparatus of civilization, as documented, seems to have been imported from somewhere else. This implication deepens when we consider the mechanism of its installation. Civilization, in the Sumerian model, does not appear to be the result of a slow, stumbling evolution. It arrives as a complete package, a suite of technologies delivered by the Apkallu sages. Writing, law, agriculture, architecture, mathematics, the foundational pillars of a complex society, are not discovered over millennia of trial and error. They are taught, implemented by external consultants, as a necessary upgrade for the new workforce. The records describe this not as a natural process, but as a deliberate and rapid transfer of knowledge, a targeted intervention designed to bring the human population up to a required level of operational efficiency. It is the story of a startup that was not founded in a garage, but was launched with a massive, pre-existing infusion of venture capital and expert guidance. This narrative of suddenness finds a disturbing echo in the archaeological record itself. The Uruk expansion, beginning around 3700 BCE, represents a period of unprecedented and explosive growth. Sumerian-style cities, artifacts, and administrative technologies suddenly appear across a vast area of the Near East, from southern Anatolia to western Iran. The speed and scale of this expansion have long puzzled historians. It does not look like the slow creep of cultural influence. It looks like a planned, coordinated rollout, the rapid establishment of a network of production centers and administrative hubs. The cold, hard evidence of the soil, the pottery, the cylinder seals, the building layouts, tells a story of acceleration that is difficult to explain through conventional models of gradual development. The Earth itself seems to bear witness to a sudden, systemic change. The silence we have been tracing is therefore not just an absence of text, but an absence of a plausible beginning. The Sumerian system appears on the world stage almost fully formed, its complex bureaucracy, its advanced knowledge, and its foundational worldview already in place. The records we have are the operational manuals, the daily logs, the corporate history. But the research and development files, the documents that would describe the system's own genesis, are missing. It is as if we have been given access to a vast and complex piece of software, but we have no access to the source code. We can see what it does, we can analyze its functions, but we can never see who wrote it, or for what ultimate purpose it was originally designed. This brings us back to that stark dividing line in the King list, the flood. It is more than a cataclysm, it is a firewall in the historical record. The world before it, with its immense timescales and its different order of rulers, is rendered permanently inaccessible. A lost server whose data can only be glimpsed through a single, summary file. The world after it is a reboot, a new version of the operating system running on adjusted parameters. Why was this reset necessary? Was the initial phase of the project a failure? Or was it a planned obsolescence, a transition from a long, slow period of foundational setup to a new phase of rapid expansion and production? The scribe offers no explanation. He simply records the event that separates then from now, a great and silent severance that makes the world of the originators forever a foreign country. This is not a story that provides answers. It is a trail of records that leads to a much larger and more unsettling question. To follow this trail further is not a promise of revelation, but a commitment to a deeper and more patient form of looking. This path does not end. For those who feel the pull of this quiet, persistent inquiry, know that this is part of a larger vigil. The evidence continues to surface, and the pattern continues to resolve into a sharper, more challenging image. The work of remembering is a long and slow process, and it continues for those who choose to remain in the archives, watching and listening as the silence itself begins to speak. The pattern is not confined to Mesopotamia. If we adjust our lens and look at the foundational accounts of other isolated, ancient civilizations, the structural echoes are difficult to ignore. From the Andean highlands to the jungles of Mesoamerica, we find recurring narratives of strange, powerful beings who arrive from the sky or the sea. They are not described as gods to be worshipped, but as founders, instructors, who bring the essential tools of civilization, agriculture, astronomy, law, and kingship, to a primitive humanity. They are the Viracochas, the Quetzalcoatls, the Oans. The names change, the cultural details are different, but the core function remains eerily similar to that of the Sumerian Apkallu, the external agent who delivers a pre-packaged and transformative technology of social order. This forces the most profound shift in perspective. Perhaps we have been reading the story of our own origins from the wrong point of view. We have always assumed that humanity is the protagonist of the story of Earth, that civilization is our great invention. But what if these records are telling the truth, in their own cold, administrative way? What if we are not the protagonists at all? What if we are a secondary element, a later addition to a narrative that was already well underway long before we arrived. This implication reframes our entire history. Earth was not an empty stage waiting for us to appear. It was an active, managed project, and we were introduced into it mid-act to fulfill a specific, and perhaps now forgotten, function. Look at an image of the Earth at night from space. The continents are traced in the delicate electric lace of city lights. Each point of light is a center of activity, of production, of movement. It is a vast interconnected network of energy consumption and information transfer. It is a global machine, humming with the ceaseless work of 7 billion people. It is beautiful. It is our creation. But in the context of the Sumerian record, it takes on a different light. It can be seen as the ultimate fulfillment of an ancient directive. A planet, once wild and untamed, now organized, catalogued, and harnessed into a system of immense and constant productivity. The Dolu, the great work, is still being performed, on a scale the ancient scribes could never have imagined. Could it be that the most fundamental drivers of our civilization, our relentless need to build, to expand, to organize, to consume, to quantify, to control, are not simply the products of our own evolution? Could they be, instead, the faint, deeply embedded echoes of our original design specification? A purpose, assigned at our creation, that has continued to run like a silent background program for millennia, shaping our societies, our economies, and our very definition of progress long after we forgot the name of the original programmer. The suggestion is not that we are puppets, but that we were given a powerful and specific initial momentum, a direction that we have continued to follow, with ever-increasing efficiency, on our own. And this leads to the final and most expansive implication. The Sumerian records present the Anunnaki as a high-level administration. But every administration, no matter how powerful, ultimately reports to a higher authority. It serves a larger corporate goal. If the Anunnaki were the regional managers of the terrestrial project, who were the owners? What was the ultimate purpose of this vast, planetary-scale enterprise? What resource was being cultivated? What product was being manufactured? The records are completely silent on this point, and this final, absolute silence is the most terrifying of all. It suggests that the entire story of humanity, as strange and as vast as it is, may itself be only a single line item in a cosmic ledger, whose full scope and purpose are entirely beyond our comprehension. We must return, in the end, to the object itself. A single piece of baked clay, resting in the controlled stillness of a museum vault. The cosmic implications, the unsettling questions about our identity and purpose, all spiral out from the simple, deliberate marks pressed into its surface by a man who lived 5,000 years ago. He was not a philosopher. He was a recorder. His job was to document the operations of his world as they were presented to him. He did his job with perfect, dispassionate fidelity. He did not know that his report, filed away and forgotten for millennia, would one day be read under a different sky, by a different kind of human, one who had forgotten the terms of the original contract. We have followed the scribe's record to the very edge of its own knowledge. We have traced the patterns, connected the functions, and listened to the profound structured silences that lie between the lines. We are now standing at the border of a known world, looking out into a vastness that the records themselves do not describe. The map they provided has ended. The implication is not an answer, but a new and much larger territory of inquiry. The ground beneath our assumptions about the past has been rendered unstable, and we are left here, in the quiet, with the unsettling feeling that the oldest story we have ever told ourselves may have been a revision, a comforting myth created to obscure the stark, functional, and deeply alienating truth of our own administrative origins. The light in the archive has not changed, but the room feels different, colder. The air, once still and heavy with the weight of dormant information, now seems thin, rarefied. We have traveled to the very edge of the record, to the last legible line on a map that leads into an uncharted and silent territory. The journey does not end here with a destination, but with a return. Our gaze is drawn back from the immense, unsettling vista of cosmic administration to the object that began it all. It is here, under the focused beam of a single lamp, a fragment of baked clay, no larger than a human hand. Its surface, a landscape of tiny wedge-shaped valleys, holds the echo of a voice that has been silent for 5,000 years. All the vast implications, all the patterns and the absences, are contained within this small, mundane thing. The silence that fills the space is no longer a simple lack of sound. It has acquired a quality, a texture. It is the silence of a question that has been fully articulated and is now waiting, suspended in the dust-filled air, for an answer that may never come. The researcher has pushed his chair back from the table. The magnifying glass lies next to the tablet, its purpose served. The work of deciphering is done. The work of contemplation has begun. There is nothing more to read on the clay. The scribe's account is finished. What remains is not in the marks he made, but in the immense and structured quiet he left behind, a quiet that now permeates this room and settles over the shoulder of anyone who has stayed to listen this long. The object has delivered its report. Now it simply rests, a piece of physical evidence for a case that can never be closed. We are left alone with the record. The hands of the researcher are gone. The hum of the analytical equipment has faded from our awareness. There is only the clay and the light. In this final, stripped-down encounter, the tablet seems to assert its own presence, its own undeniable reality. It is not an idea or a theory. It is a thing. It was dug from the earth. It was shaped by a human hand, incised with a reed stylus, and fired in a kiln. Its survival across 50 centuries of flood and fire, of rising and falling empires, is a statistical improbability so vast as to feel deliberate. It is a piece of memory that has refused to be erased, a message in a bottle that has finally washed ashore, its contents stark, alien, and written in a language we had forgotten we were meant to understand. The scribe who made these marks did not intend for us to find them. His intended audience was his contemporary, his superior, the archives of his own temple. He was filing a report, not writing for posterity. There is an accidental honesty in his work, the honesty of a document never meant for outside eyes. He recorded the world as it was presented to him, with a professional detachment that is more chilling than any work of fiction. He felt no need to persuade, to embellish, to justify. He was simply taking minutes, noting the operational logic of his reality. And in his dispassionate silence, in his complete absence from the text, he becomes the most powerful witness of all. He is the ghost in the machine, the unseen recorder whose fidelity to the record has bequeathed to us this impossible and coherent problem. The wind, a low and mournful sound, presses against the thick glass of the archive windows. It is a sound from the outside world, a reminder of the linear, rushing time that exists beyond these walls. But in here, time has looped back on itself. The past is not a foreign country. It is this room. The questions posed by the scribe's administrative account are no longer historical inquiries. They have become personal. The silence in the archive is now an internal silence, a space that has opened up within the viewer. The narrative has ended, but the resonance of its core frequency, the cold, steady hum of a purpose assigned, not discovered, continues to vibrate long after the voice of the narrator has faded. We are no longer examining an artifact. We are examining the unsettling reflection it casts upon our own world. The single lamp on the researcher's desk clicks off. The room is plunged into a profound darkness, broken only by the faint green glow of a climate control monitor. The tablet is no longer visible, but its presence is felt more intensely than before. It is a small, dense node of immense time, a gravitational point around which the darkness itself seems to bend. To leave this room now is to carry that darkness with you, to step back into the brightly lit world of the present with the knowledge of this ancient, unsettling quiet. The story is over, but the memory it has unearthed remains active, a piece of code that, once run, cannot be easily uninstalled. It changes the way one looks at the sky, at the foundations of our cities, at the very word work. The scene dissolves, moving from the interior darkness of the archive to the vast open landscape of the Iraqi desert at dusk. The sky is a deep, bruised purple, and the first stars are beginning to appear. In the distance, the silhouette of a ruined ziggurat stands against the fading light, its broken tiers like a grand, abandoned staircase to the heavens. The wind moves across the sand, whispering through the shattered brickwork, a sound that has not changed in millennia. This is the place where the story was born, the physical stage for the events the scribe recorded. The ruin is not just a monument to a dead civilization. It is a testament to the scale of the original project, a silent architectural witness to a purpose whose full scope still eludes us. There is no human presence here. There is only the wind, the dust, and the immense, silent weight of the sky. The camera holds on the ruin, allowing its immense loneliness to fill the frame. The structure seems to be waiting, a piece of vast and forgotten machinery left to rust in the desert, its original operators long since departed. The silence here is different from the silence of the archive. It is not the silence of preservation, but the silence of abandonment. It speaks not of what has been saved, but of what has been left behind. The questions here are not academic. They are elemental, etched into the very landscape by the slow, patient erosion of time. The view pulls away, rising slowly from the desert floor, the ziggurat shrinking until it is just another feature in a vast and desolate plain. The land itself becomes an artifact, a tablet on which a story of immense ambition and eventual departure has been written. The lights of a distant modern city begin to glow on the horizon, a faint electric nebula against the encroaching darkness. It is a new kind of structure, a new network of work and energy, but it rests upon the same ancient ground, its foundations sunk into the deep, silent layers of a history it does not remember. The contrast is stark, the quiet vertical ruin of the past and the sprawling, humming network of the present, both existing under the same dispassionate gaze of the stars. The perspective continues to shift, pulling back further, faster, until the curve of the Earth becomes visible. The continent gives way to the deep black of space. Below, the planet turns, a silent marbled sphere of blue, white, and brown. The electric grid of human civilization traces the land masses, a delicate, glowing web of interconnected activity. It is the image of a world fully organized, fully networked, a planetary system of production and information exchange operating at maximum capacity. It is the machine we have built, the culmination of the trajectory that began with the first cities on the Mesopotamian plain. Seen from this immense distance, it is both a triumph of human ingenuity and perhaps the final perfect fulfillment of an ancient, forgotten work order. In the cold, absolute silence of space, the Earth hangs like a jewel. But the perspective it offers is unsettling. The planet seems less like a home and more like a facility, a single isolated outpost of complex activity in the vast, empty darkness. The questions that began with a single piece of clay now expand to a planetary scale. What is the purpose of this great, humming machine? What resource is being harvested from this small, blue world? The silence of space provides no answer. It is the ultimate archive, holding a history so vast and so old that our own planetary story is but a single, fleeting entry in an incomprehensible ledger. The image holds, allowing the scale of the final, unstated mystery to settle in. The view dissolves one last time, returning to where we began. A dark room, A single fragmented tablet in a display case. The museum is empty. The halls are silent. The guards have made their final rounds. The object rests alone in the darkness, its story told, its secrets returned to the quiet custody of the night. It does not offer comfort. It does not provide a resolution. It is a permanent and unmoving piece of the past that has intruded upon our present, a stark and functional message that sits uncomfortably within the grand narratives we have built for ourselves. It is a reminder that what we are may be defined not by the stories we tell, but by the records we have forgotten how to read. The darkness in the museum hall is complete. There is no more movement, no more sound. The journey is over. The file has been read. What remains is the lingering resonance of the scribe's dispassionate account, the feeling that a vast and essential piece of our own identity is not a sacred text, but a missing personnel file in a forgotten archive. The question of our purpose, once a philosophical inquiry, now feels like a practical one, a matter of locating a contract whose terms we have long since forgotten, but by which we may still be bound. The artifact is now returned to its silence, waiting. The final image holds on the dark, empty space where the tablet rests, unseen. Nothing moves. The silence is absolute. The story has not ended. It has simply been remembered.